What you call laziness might actually be your mind's intelligent rebellion against a toxic productivity culture that's slowly killing your creativity. Your refusal to participate in the endless cycle of goal setting, habit tracking, and self-optimization isn't a character flaw. It's your psyche's attempt to protect itself from a system designed to extract every ounce of mental energy until you're a hollow shell of productivity metrics. The controversial reality is that your lazy moments might be the only times your mind feels safe enough to access its true creative potential. While everyone else is busy optimizing their lives into mechanical efficiency, your mind is preserving something precious: the capacity for original thought, spontaneous insight, and authentic self-expression that only emerges in the spaces between forced productivity. There's a circus that travels from town to town, and in this circus lives the most magnificent creature you've ever seen. A massive elephant weighing over 6 tons with tusks that gleam like ivory and muscles that could uproot trees with a single pull. But here's what will shock you. This giant, this force of nature, stands perfectly still beside a tiny wooden stake driven into the ground, held by nothing more than a thin rope that a child could break with their bare hands. The townspeople gather around, amazed not by the elephant's power, but by its apparent stupidity. They whisper among themselves, "How foolish this animal must be. Can't it see that rope means nothing? One step and it would be free." But what they don't understand is the elephant story. When this giant was just a baby weighing barely 100 pounds, that same rope was strong enough to hold it. Day after day, the young elephant pulled and struggled, trying to break free. The rope cut into its skin, the stake held firm, and eventually, after countless failed attempts, something inside that baby elephant died. Not its body, but its belief. Now, years later, with the power to demolish buildings, that elephant remains prisoner, not to a rope, but to a memory. A memory that whispers, "You tried before and you failed. Why try again?" You see, most of you sitting here today, most of you listening to these words, you're not lazy. You're that elephant. You've been told you're lazy by a world that doesn't understand the difference between a tired body and a tired mind. You've been labeled as unmotivated, as lacking discipline, as someone who just doesn't want it badly enough. But I'm here to tell you something that might change everything. Your mind isn't lazy. It's exhausted from fighting battles you didn't even know you were fighting. Think about it. From the moment you wake up until the moment you close your eyes, your mind is making decisions: what to wear, what to eat, how to respond to that email, whether to take the stairs or the elevator, what to say to your boss, how to handle that difficult conversation with your spouse. Researchers tell us the average person makes over 35,000 decisions every single day. 35,000. Your mind is working harder than a computer processor, and just like any machine, it gets tired. But there's something more sinister happening. While your mind is processing all these daily decisions, it's also running another program in the background, the doubt program. This program is constantly scanning for reasons why you can't succeed, why you shouldn't try, why you're not good enough. It's replaying every failure, every rejection, every time someone told you that you weren't capable. This background program is draining your mental battery faster than you can charge it. I remember a man who worked in a steel factory for 15 years. Every day he would clock in at 6 in the morning and spend 8 hours in the heat and noise, his hands growing calloused, his back aching. But this man had a secret dream. He wanted to be an architect. He would spend his lunch break sketching buildings on scraps of paper, creating designs that would take your breath away. His fellow workers would laugh and say, "You're a factory worker, not some fancy college boy. Stick to what you know." For 15 years, this man carried his dream like a stone in his chest. Every evening, he would come home exhausted, and his wife would ask, "Why don't you go back to school? Why don't you try?" And he would always have the same answer: "I'm too tired, maybe tomorrow." But tomorrow never came, because he wasn't physically tired. He was mentally exhausted from fighting a war between his dream and his fear. You see, what people called laziness in this man was actually the result of mental warfare. His mind was spending so much energy battling doubt, fear, and the voices of discouragement that there was nothing left for action. He was like a smartphone with dozens of apps running in the background, draining the battery even when you're not actively using it. The tragedy is that we live in a world that celebrates busyness but doesn't understand mental fatigue. We praise people who work 18-hour days but condemn those who need to rest their minds. We've created a culture where being tired is seen as weakness, where needing a mental break is viewed as laziness. But what if I told you that the most successful people in history understood something that most people don't? That mental rest is not the opposite of productivity. It's the foundation of it. Your mind is not a machine that can run indefinitely without maintenance. It's more like a muscle that needs both exercise and recovery. When you go to the gym and lift weights, your muscles get tired. That tiredness isn't a sign that you're weak. It's a sign that you've been working. The muscle grows stronger during the rest period, not during the workout. The same principle applies to your mind, but here's where it gets complicated. Unlike physical tiredness, which is obvious and socially acceptable, mental tiredness is invisible and often misunderstood.
When your body is tired, you can sit down and people understand. When your mind is tired, there's no visible sign, no socially acceptable way to say, I need to stop thinking for a while. So you push through, and the tiredness compounds layer upon layer until what started as healthy mental fatigue becomes chronic mental exhaustion. This exhaustion manifests in ways that look like laziness, but aren't. You find yourself scrolling through social media for hours, not because you enjoy it, but because your mind is too tired to engage in anything more demanding. You procrastinate on important tasks, not because you don't care about them, but because the thought of one more decision, one more challenge, feels overwhelming. You avoid opportunities, not because you don't want to succeed, but because your mind has learned to associate trying with the pain of disappointment. The elephant in the circus isn't lazy, it's operating from a learned helplessness that was programmed into it when it was young and vulnerable. Similarly, many of you aren't lazy, you're operating from patterns of mental exhaustion that were established during times when you were overwhelmed, unsupported, or repeatedly discouraged. But here's the beautiful truth that the elephant doesn't know and that you're about to discover: that rope has no power anymore. The stake in the ground is just a stick. The only thing holding you back is a memory, a pattern, a program running in the background of your mind, and programs can be rewritten. The difference between the person who breaks through and the person who remains stuck isn't talent, luck, or some magical motivation that falls from the sky. It's understanding. Understanding that what you've been calling laziness is actually your mind's cry for help, for rest, for a different approach. Understanding that you're not broken, you're not defective, you're not destined for mediocrity, you're just tired from fighting the wrong battle. When you understand this, when you really grasp that your struggle isn't with your character, but with your mental energy management, everything changes. The shame disappears, the self-judgment quiets down, and for the first time in perhaps years, you can see clearly what's really happening and what needs to happen next.
Your mind wasn't designed to be a battleground, but that's exactly what it has become. Every morning, you wake up and the war begins. The moment your eyes open, the generals of doubt march in with their armies of what if and you can't and remember last time. Before you've even had your first cup of coffee, your mind is already under siege. Scientists have discovered something remarkable about the human brain. They've learned that making decisions, even simple ones, depletes what they call mental glucose. It's like your mind runs on a battery, and every choice you make drains a little bit of power. But here's what they didn't tell you in school. It's not just the big decisions that drain you. It's also the constant invisible decisions your mind makes every second about whether you're safe, whether you're worthy, whether you should even try. Your brain has a primitive security system that was designed thousands of years ago when our ancestors faced real physical dangers. This system worked perfectly when the biggest threat was a hungry lion. See lion, feel fear, run or fight, survive another day. Simple, effective, but in today's world, this same system treats your dreams like dangerous predators. It sees your desire to start that business, to change careers, to write that book, to speak on that stage, and it sounds the same alarm it would sound for a charging rhino. The problem is, you can run from a rhino, but you can't run from your dreams. So your mind stays in a constant state of alert, burning through mental energy like a car with the engine running in park. You're not moving forward, but you're burning fuel at an incredible rate. This is why you can spend an entire day doing nothing and still feel completely drained by evening. Let me tell you about someone who understood this in a way that changed everything. There was a woman who tried to start her own business 3 times, and 3 times she failed. The first failure broke her heart. The second failure broke her confidence. The third failure broke something deeper, her belief in her own judgment. After that third failure, people started whispering that maybe she just wasn't cut out for business. Maybe she should stick to her job, play it safe, stop reaching for things that were obviously beyond her grasp. For 2 years, she didn't try anything new. People called her lazy, said she'd lost her drive, her ambition. But what they couldn't see was that her mind had become a battlefield. Every time she had an idea, 2 armies would clash inside her head. One army carried the banners of possibility, hope, and vision. The other army carried the flags of past failures, statistical probabilities, and practical concerns. The battle was exhausting. She would lie awake at night, not because she was lazy, but because her mind was fighting a war that never ended. During the day, she would start to take action on an idea, then stop, paralyzed by the mental combat happening between her ears. People saw the stopping and called it laziness. But what they were really seeing was the visible result of invisible exhaustion. But then something shifted. One day, she realized that her mind wasn't trying to hurt her. It was trying to protect her. That security system in her brain, the one that kept sounding the alarm every time she tried to move forward, wasn't her enemy. It was a misguided friend, like a bodyguard who's so overprotective that he won't let you leave the house. Understanding this changed everything. Instead of fighting her mind, she started working with it. Instead of forcing herself forward, despite the fear, she began to acknowledge the fear, thank it for trying to keep her safe, and then gently redirect that protective energy towards supporting her goals instead of sabotaging them. Your mind is like a muscle, but it's a muscle that most people have never learned to train properly.
You know how to train your biceps, your legs, your cardiovascular system. You understand that muscles need both work and rest, challenge and recovery. But somehow, we expect our minds to operate at peak performance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever acknowledging that mental muscles get tired too. When your arm muscle is tired from lifting weights, you don't call yourself lazy. You recognize that the muscle has been working and needs time to recover and rebuild. But when your mental muscle is tired from making decisions, solving problems, processing emotions, and fighting internal battles, we've been trained to call that laziness. This misunderstanding has created more broken dreams than any external obstacle ever could. The truth is, your mind operates on cycles just like everything else in nature. There are seasons for planting and seasons for harvesting, times for action and times for reflection. But we live in a culture that only celebrates the harvest season and makes you feel guilty during the planting season, when the real work is happening underground where no one can see it. Right now, your mind might be in a winter season. The trees look dead in winter, but beneath the surface, the roots are growing deeper, stronger, preparing for the explosion of growth that spring will bring. What looks like laziness on the surface might actually be your mind doing the deep, invisible work of preparation. But here's what you need to understand. There's a difference between healthy mental rest and mental avoidance. Healthy mental rest feels like relief, like taking off tight shoes at the end of a long day. Mental avoidance feels like anxiety, like running away from something that's chasing you. One restores your energy, the other drains it. One prepares you for the next challenge, the other makes you more afraid of challenges. Learning to recognize this difference is crucial because most people don't know when their mind genuinely needs rest versus when their mind needs gentle encouragement to move forward. This confusion keeps people stuck in cycles where they rest when they should act and push when they should rest, creating a pattern of chronic mental fatigue that looks and feels like laziness, but is actually just poor mental energy management. The woman I told you about earlier, the one who failed 3 times in business, she learned to recognize these different states. She learned that when her mind felt heavy and cloudy, that was usually a sign of avoidance, and the cure was small, gentle action. But when her mind felt scattered and overwhelmed, that was usually a sign of genuine fatigue, and the cure was intentional rest and reflection. This understanding transformed her approach to everything. Instead of judging herself for mental tiredness, she began to treat it like valuable information. Instead of forcing herself through mental exhaustion, she began to honor her mind's need for recovery. Instead of seeing rest as the enemy of progress, she began to see it as the foundation of sustainable success. And here's what happened. When she stopped fighting her mind and started working with it, when she stopped calling mental fatigue laziness and started calling it information, something remarkable occurred. Her mind began to trust her again. That overprotective security system began to relax because it recognized that she was finally listening to its concerns instead of overriding them. The battles in her mind didn't stop overnight, but they became shorter, less intense, more manageable. She learned to be the peacekeeper in her own head instead of the general of one of the warring armies. And when your mind is at peace, when it's not spending all its energy on internal warfare, you discover something amazing. You have enough mental energy left over to actually pursue your dreams.
There comes a moment in every person's life when they must learn to distinguish between the voice of wisdom and the voice of fear. Both voices speak with authority. Both claim to have your best interests at heart. Both sound remarkably similar. But one voice leads to growth, and the other leads to a prison of your own making. The challenge is that fear has learned to speak in the language of wisdom. Fear says, be realistic about your limitations. Wisdom says, understand your current capacity. Fear says, remember how badly it hurt last time. Wisdom says, learn from past experiences. Fear says, you're not ready yet. Wisdom says, prepare thoroughly, then act. The words are almost identical, but the spirit behind them is completely different. Breaking the cycle of mental resistance begins with learning to hear the difference between these two voices. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending that challenges don't exist. This is about developing the ability to recognize when your mind is genuinely protecting you from harm versus when it's protecting you from growth. Let me tell you about a young woman who discovered this distinction in the most unexpected place, a swimming pool. She had been swimming competitively since she was 7 years old, training 6 hours a day, sacrificing her social life, her free time, everything for the dream of making it to the Olympics. But by the time she was 19, something had changed. The times that used to come easily were now impossible to achieve. Her coach was frustrated. Her parents were worried. Everyone around her kept saying the same thing. You're not trying hard enough. You're getting lazy. You've lost your hunger. But she knew that wasn't true. She was training harder than ever, pushing her body to its absolute limits. Yet somehow, the harder she pushed, the slower she got. The more effort she applied, the worse her performance became. She began to believe what everyone was telling her, that she was losing her edge, her competitiveness, her will to win. Then one day, her coach brought in a sports psychologist who asked her a simple question: what's going through your mind during your races? And for the first time, she became aware of the constant conversation happening in her head while she was swimming. It wasn't encouragement or strategy or focus. It was a relentless stream of doubt, comparison, and self-judgment. You're behind already. The girl in lane 4 is faster than you. Your stroke doesn't look right. You're going to embarrass yourself. You should have trained harder yesterday. You're not good enough for this level. The mental chatter was so constant, so automatic, that she had stopped noticing it. But her mind was spending more energy on this internal dialogue than on actually swimming. The psychologist helped her understand something revolutionary. Her mind wasn't lazy or unmotivated. It was exhausted from trying to swim 2 races at the same time. One race was happening in the pool against her competitors. The other race was happening in her head against her own thoughts. She was literally fighting herself while trying to compete against others. This is what mental resistance looks like. It's not the absence of effort, it's effort directed in conflicting directions. It's like trying to drive a car with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. The engine is working harder than ever, but you're not moving forward. In fact, you might be moving backward while burning more fuel than someone who's cruising effortlessly down the highway. Most people experience mental resistance in 3 distinct stages, and understanding these stages is crucial for breaking free from the cycle of exhaustion that masquerades as laziness. The first stage is what I call the storm. This is when your mind is actively fighting your goals. Every time you think about taking action, you feel a surge of anxiety, doubt, or overwhelm. Your mind floods you with reasons why it won't work, why you're not ready, why you should wait. This stage is actually exhausting because your mental energy is being consumed by internal conflict. People in this stage often say things like, I want to, but I just can't seem to make myself do it. The second stage is the fog. This is when the active resistance has worn you down so much that your mind simply shuts down. You don't feel anxious anymore. You don't feel much of anything. You're numb, disconnected, going through the motions of life without any real engagement. People mistake this stage for laziness because there's no visible struggle, but it's actually a form of mental paralysis. Your mind has used up so much energy fighting in the storm that it has nothing left. The third stage is the false peace. This is the most dangerous stage because it feels like acceptance, but it's actually surrender. You've stopped wanting what you used to want. You've convinced yourself that those dreams weren't really important anyway. You tell yourself you're being mature, realistic, practical, but deep down, there's a quiet sadness, a sense that something vital has been lost. Here's what most people don't realize. You can get stuck in any of these stages for years, even decades. And because each stage looks different from the outside, people around you will give you different advice. In the storm stage, they'll tell you to calm down, stop overthinking, just do it. In the fog stage, they'll tell you to get motivated, find your passion, snap out of it. In the false peace stage, they'll tell you that you've matured, that it's good you're not chasing impossible dreams anymore. But none of this advice addresses the real issue, which is that your mind has learned to treat your growth as a threat. Your mental security system has become so overactive that it sees opportunity as danger, progress as risk, change as something to be avoided at all costs. The swimmer I told you about was stuck in the storm stage. Every race was a battle not just against her competitors, but against the voice in her head that kept telling her she wasn't good enough. The breakthrough came when she learned to recognize that voice not as truth, but as mental resistance. She learned to hear it, acknowledge it, and then redirect her attention to what she could control in that moment. Her stroke, her breathing, her technique. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Within 6 months, she had dropped 3 seconds off her best time, not by swimming harder, but by swimming with a quiet mind. She learned that peak performance isn't about fighting through mental resistance, it's about dissolving it. This is the crucial distinction that changes everything. Most people think they need more willpower to overcome mental resistance, but willpower is finite and resistance is renewable. It's like trying to bail out a sinking boat instead of plugging the hole. You can work harder and harder, but you're fighting the symptom, not the cause. The real breakthrough comes when you stop fighting the resistance and start understanding it. When you recognize that mental resistance isn't a character flaw or a sign of laziness, it's information. It's your mind's way of saying, I'm scared and I need some reassurance before we move forward. Most people give up right before their breakthrough because they interpret mental resistance as a sign that they're on the wrong path. But often resistance is actually a sign that you're on the right path, the path that leads to growth, which your mind perceives as dangerous territory. The swimmer's story didn't end with her personal breakthrough. Her newfound understanding of mental resistance began to transform every area of her life. She stopped fighting herself and started working with herself. She stopped seeing her mind as an obstacle and started seeing it as a partner that needed better communication and clearer direction. When an athlete suffers a serious injury, they don't return to competition the next day. They understand that healing requires a process, that strength must be rebuilt gradually, that rushing back too soon will only cause more damage. Yet when it comes to mental strength, we expect immediate recovery. We want to go from mental exhaustion to peak performance overnight. And when it doesn't happen, we call ourselves failures. Your mind is not different from any other part of your body that needs rehabilitation after being overtaxed. Just as a physical therapist wouldn't ask someone with a broken leg to run a marathon on day 1 of recovery, You cannot expect a mind that has been fighting internal battles for years to suddenly operate at full capacity without proper conditioning. The key to rebuilding mental strength lies in understanding a principle that elite athletes have known for decades: progressive overload. You don't build muscle by lifting the heaviest weight you can find on your first day in the gym. You start with weights that challenge you but don't break you, then gradually increase the load as your strength develops. The same principle applies to mental strength. But here's where most people make a critical mistake. They try to rebuild their mental strength by tackling their biggest fears, their most challenging goals, their most overwhelming problems first. It's like trying to bench press 300 pounds when you haven't been in a gym for 5 years. Not only will you fail, but you'll likely injure yourself and become even more convinced that you don't have what it takes. Let me tell you about a woman who understood this principle in a way that changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. She was a single mother, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, barely making ends meet, exhausted from the constant struggle of trying to provide for her children while battling the voices in her head that told her she would never amount to anything more than what she was. Every night, after putting her children to bed, she would sit at her kitchen table and dream about starting her own business. She had ideas, good ones, but every time she thought about actually taking action, the familiar wave of overwhelm would crash over her. The voice in her head would start its familiar refrain: you don't have time, you don't have money, you don't have the right education, you don't have connections, you don't have experience. For months, she stayed stuck in this cycle. She would get excited about an idea during the day, then talk herself out of it by evening. She would start to research something online, then get overwhelmed by how much she didn't know and close the laptop. She would write down business plans, then crumple them up and throw them away because they seemed impossible. Everyone around her could see her frustration, but they misinterpreted it. They saw someone who talked about big dreams but never took action. They saw someone who was always planning but never executing. They labeled her a dreamer, someone who lacked the practical skills to turn vision into reality. But what they couldn't see was that her mind was so exhausted from fighting itself that she had no mental energy left for forward movement. The breakthrough came when she stopped trying to solve her biggest problem and started solving her smallest one. Instead of trying to figure out how to start a business while working 2 jobs and raising 3 children, she made a different commitment. She decided to read 1 page of a business book every night before bed. Just 1 page. It seems almost laughably small, doesn't it? 1 page. Most people would dismiss that as meaningless, as not enough to make any real difference. But this woman understood something that most people miss. The goal wasn't to learn everything about business in 1 night. The goal was to prove to her mind that she could make a commitment and keep it. That first night, she read 1 page. Her mind was quiet because 1 page wasn't threatening. There was no voice saying, you don't have time for this, because it only took 3 minutes. There was no voice saying, this is too complicated, because it was just 1 page. There was no voice saying, you're not smart enough, because she wasn't trying to understand everything, just something. The second night, she read another page. Still no internal resistance. The third night, another page. By the end of the first week, something interesting was happening. Her mind began to look forward to those 3 minutes. It became a peaceful part of her day, a small victory that she could count on. After a month of reading 1 page per night, something shifted. Her mind started to trust her again. It began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could make commitments and keep them. So she added a second small commitment. She would write down 1 business idea every morning while drinking her coffee. Not a full business plan, not a detailed strategy, just 1 simple idea. The beauty of this approach is that it works with your mind's natural functioning instead of against it. When you make tiny commitments and keep them, you're not just building habits, you're rebuilding trust with yourself. You're proving to the security system in your brain that change doesn't have to be dangerous, that growth doesn't have to be overwhelming. Within 6 months, this woman had read 180 pages of business books, written down over 150 business ideas, and most importantly, retrained her mind to see action as normal instead of threatening. Her mind was no longer fighting her dreams because she had shown it that pursuing dreams could happen in small, manageable steps. But the real transformation happened in month 7, because her mind was now quiet, because it wasn't spending energy on internal resistance. She suddenly had mental clarity she hadn't experienced in years. With this clarity came an idea, not for a complicated business requiring huge investments and years of preparation, but for a simple service she could start from her kitchen table with skills she already had. Within a year, that simple service had grown into a business generating more income than both of her jobs combined. Within 2 years, she had employees. Within 5 years, she was giving speeches to other single mothers about how to break free from the cycle of mental exhaustion that keeps dreams locked away. The principle she discovered is what I call micro-commitments. These are commitments so small that your mind doesn't even register them as threats. They're like Trojan horses. They slip past your mental security system because they appear harmless, but they carry within them the power to transform your entire relationship with action.
Most people fail at building mental strength because they try to make macro commitments. They decide they're going to work out for 2 hours every day, starting tomorrow. They decide they're going to wake up at 5 in the morning and meditate for an hour. They decide they're going to write a novel in 30 days. These commitments trigger every alarm in their mental security system, but micro commitments are different. They're too small to trigger resistance, but they're large enough to build momentum. 1 push-up, 5 minutes of reading, writing 1 sentence, making 1 phone call, walking to the end of the block. These actions seem insignificant, but they have a cumulative power that most people never discover because they're too focused on making dramatic changes. The woman's story illustrates a profound truth. Most people never discover their potential because they exhaust themselves trying to leap from where they are to where they want to be in one giant jump. But potential is unlocked gradually through consistent small actions that retrain your mind to see you as someone who follows through on commitments. When your mind trusts you again, when it stops fighting you and starts supporting you, you discover something remarkable. You have access to levels of creativity, energy, and focus that you forgot you possessed. The mental energy that was being consumed by internal warfare is suddenly available for innovation, problem solving, and sustained action toward your goals.
When your mind finally stops fighting you and starts working with you, something extraordinary happens. It's like the difference between swimming upstream against a powerful current and suddenly turning around to let that same current carry you toward your destination. The effort required drops dramatically, but the speed increases exponentially. This is what living from mental clarity looks like. It's not about eliminating all challenges or obstacles from your life. It's about approaching those challenges with a mind that's rested, focused, and unified in its purpose. When your mental energy isn't being drained by internal conflict, you discover reserves of strength and creativity that you never knew existed. There was a teacher who worked in one of the most challenging school districts in the country. Test scores were among the lowest in the state. Teacher turnover was epidemic. Students came to school hungry, angry, and convinced that education had nothing to offer them. Most teachers lasted less than 2 years before burning out completely. But this teacher had been there for 8 years, and something was different about her classroom. Her students were engaged, excited about learning, achieving at levels that shocked even the most experienced educators. Other teachers would walk by her classroom and wonder what secret she possessed, what special training she had received, what magic formula she was using. The truth was simpler and more profound than anyone realized. This teacher had learned to manage her mental energy the same way a professional athlete manages their physical energy. She understood that she couldn't give what she didn't have, that she couldn't inspire minds that were hungry to learn if her own mind was starved and exhausted. Every morning, before she entered her classroom, she spent 15 minutes in her car doing what she called mental preparation. This wasn't meditation or positive thinking or any complicated technique. She simply sat quietly and reminded her mind of why she chose this profession, what she hoped to accomplish that day, and how she wanted her students to feel when they left her classroom. This simple practice did something remarkable. It unified her mental energy around a clear purpose instead of allowing it to be scattered by all the challenges and frustrations that would inevitably arise during the day. When a student was disruptive, instead of her mind immediately going to thoughts of frustration or failure, it would automatically ask, what does this child need right now and how can I provide it? When administrators came with new requirements and impossible deadlines, instead of her mind spiraling into overwhelm and resentment, it would calmly assess what was possible and create a plan. When parents complained or criticized, instead of taking it personally, her mind would stay focused on the shared goal of helping their child succeed. The transformation wasn't just in her own experience, it was in the atmosphere of her entire classroom. Students could sense that she wasn't fighting them, wasn't fighting the system, wasn't fighting herself. They could feel that all of her mental energy was directed toward their growth and success. And they responded by giving their best effort in return. Word spread about the remarkable things happening in her classroom. Other teachers started asking for advice. Administrators started using her methods as a model for the entire district. Within 3 years, the school had gone from being on the state's failure list to being recognized as a model of educational excellence. But here's what's most important about this story. The teacher's transformation didn't require her to become a different person. She didn't suddenly develop superhuman patience or motivation. She simply learned to direct her existing mental energy more efficiently. Instead of her mind working against her, it was working for her. Instead of mental energy being consumed by resistance and frustration, it was channeled towards solutions and growth. This is the ultimate truth about mental clarity. It doesn't give you more mental energy, but it stops wasting the energy you already have. When your mind is clear, unified, and focused on what matters most, you accomplish more in a day than most people accomplish in a week. Not because you're working harder, but because you're working without internal interference. Living from mental clarity requires creating what I call sustainable mental habits. These are simple practices that keep your mind operating efficiently without becoming another source of pressure or obligation. The teacher's 15-minute morning routine is an example of a sustainable mental habit. It was simple enough to do every day, powerful enough to make a real difference,
and flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Sustainable mental habits have 3 characteristics. First, they're consistent but not rigid. You do them regularly, but you don't beat yourself up if you miss a day. Second, they're restorative, not depleting. They give you energy instead of taking it away. Third, they're aligned with your deeper purpose, so they feel meaningful rather than mechanical. When you develop sustainable mental habits, you create what athletes call baseline fitness for your mind. Just as physical baseline fitness means you can handle unexpected physical demands without injury, mental baseline fitness means you can handle unexpected emotional or psychological demands without breaking down. The ripple effect of a clear, rested mind extends far beyond your own life. When you stop fighting yourself, you stop fighting others. When you're not constantly battling internal resistance, you have patience and understanding for the resistance you encounter in other people. When your mental energy isn't being drained by your own internal conflicts, you have surplus energy to invest in relationships, in service, in making a positive impact on the world around you. This is how one person's mental transformation can change an entire community. The teacher didn't just improve her own classroom, she became a catalyst for transformation throughout her entire school district. Her mental clarity created a ripple effect that touched thousands of lives. You see, when people encounter someone who has learned to live from mental clarity instead of mental conflict, it gives them permission to believe that such a way of life is possible for them too. Your mental peace becomes proof that the battles raging in their minds don't have to be permanent fixtures. The giant that has always lived within you isn't waiting for perfect conditions to emerge. It isn't waiting for all your problems to be solved or all your fears to disappear. It's waiting for one thing, for your mind to stop fighting it and start supporting it. When that happens, when your mental energy is unified behind your growth instead of divided by internal conflict, there is no limit to what becomes possible. The rope that has held you back exists only in your mind. The stake in the ground is nothing more than an old memory. You have always had the power to break free. You just needed to understand that the prison was never external, it was mental. And what the mind creates, the mind can transform.